Thank you, Brian. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to present the Roadmap to Quality and Regulatory Excellence. I'm going to discuss first the pharmaceutical industry in India, which is considered the pharmacy of the world, the challenges faced by this pharmaceutical industry, the inspection trends from 2020 to 2022, and how will India deal with these challenges and ensure compliance and maintain quality. So if we look at the pharmaceutical industry in India, it's expected to reach 65 billion next year, 2024, and 130 billion by 2030. And as you can see on the map, there are pharmaceutical clusters of current and established drug clusters and formulations, but also emerging bulk drug clusters and formulation clusters. Now, looking back again on the numbers, 25% of all medicines sold in the UK are manufactured in India. 40% of all generics used in the USA are from India. And 70% of all vaccines used by WHO are manufactured in India. So clearly, the pharmaceutical industry in India is quite important for the rest of the world as well as India. So what are the challenges facing pharma companies in India, you ask? Well, there's an increase in variable costs. And so these are hard to control. And so the question becomes, well, how can you best manage that? There's increasing demands on the quality and regulatory functions because of legislative changes. As we all know, regulations only increase over time. They never seem to get taken away. Recruitment and retention. There's an active marketplace making it more difficult to hire and hold on to staff. They have more options available as to where they can work, and so you want to be the employer of choice. There are supply chain difficulties, as we've seen through COVID. There's reliance on China for APIs. Almost 80% of the Indian pharma market requirements for APIs is fulfilled by companies in China. And as you know, there are geopolitical issues and policy changes that are impacting supply and will continue to impact supply. There are efforts underway to bring more API manufacturing into India with a variety of organizations lobbying for the creation of 2 to 3 API clusters in the country. So again, what are some more challenges facing pharma companies in India? Well, there's a huge backlog of audits due to COVID restrictions. And so that means in the coming number of years, the number of audits is expected to increase dramatically in India and China. US lawmakers are putting pressure on the FDA to increase inspections in China and India. And India is already seeing a surge in audits, which is expected to continue and ramp up into 2024 and beyond. So let's look at what the trends are from 2020 to 2022. So this is FDA inspections in the drug category. And so these are fiscal years 2020, which of course ends September 30th, September 31st. And so 2020 was the tip of COVID halfway through that year. And then 2021 was all COVID. In 2022, we're still seeing restrictions on travel. And so the total inspections, as you can see, 101 in 2020, 14 in 2021, and 11 in 2022. So clearly, FDA has inspections to be conducted, and they will start taking place as we move forward. So how will we deal with the challenges, ensure compliance, and maintain quality? Well, we're going to take a new look at how quality and regulatory functions are managed. And this quality management maturity model offers a means of future-proofing quality and supporting supply chain robustness. QM identifies area where quality management practices can be enhanced, assisting the path to quality and regulatory excellence, and ensuring production can continue. From here, I'm going to hand it off to Samantha, who's going to go into more depth on QMM.
Hello, and welcome again to NSF's Roadmap to Quality and Regulatory Excellence. A big thanks to Andy Pappas for his really interesting insights just now in part 1. Now on to part 2. So as you can see, we'll look at today QMM and what you need to know. We'll be looking at the trends of today, the US FDA's focus on quality management maturity, the introduction of NSF's Quality Management Maturity Assessment Service. We'll also take a bit of a look at culture and really how will you prepare yourselves for regulatory success. So a bit about me. My name's Sam Atkinson. I'm an Executive Vice President here at NSF. I've been with NSF for, almost a year. I joined last December. And prior to that, I worked for the Department of Health and Social Care here in the UK. I was looking after a big reform programme for social care for about a year. Prior to that, I worked for the UK's medicines regulator, the UK MHRA, or Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency. I worked there for, I think probably 16 or 17 years. And during that time, I started there as an inspector in 2006. And following that, I worked my way up until I was the Chief Quality and Access Officer and was looking after the inspection, the enforcement, standards, licensing, clinical trials, and a whole host of other things. During my time at the MHRA, though, I experienced an awful lot of transformation, of change, culture change, how to deal with improving quality across different systems, and saw an enormous amount of organisations really trying to mature their systems through that process. So the agenda for today, we'll look at regulatory findings and we'll look at what's changing and influencing those regulatory approaches. I think what's interesting as well is to look at perhaps year on year how we're finding the same things. We've got the same regulations, but maybe we need to focus on different things. We need to focus on tracking and perhaps not prevention. Perhaps we're not looking at prevention well enough. We need to be more reactive rather than proactive. We're now seeing new trends. There's more focus on culture, like I say, and we need to explore perhaps this important initiative that's coming through, the QMM, and we'll certainly talk a bit about that, and we'll think about that roadmap for success. So let's look at the FDA citations to begin with. Like I said, we're seeing the same year on year. The regulations are the same, but perhaps we're not thinking about it in the right way. Perhaps there are some challenges for the sector. We need to perhaps look at what we focus on. I think probably in the past we focused on deficiency too much and not really the non-compliance or the intent or spirit of the issue. We really need to start digging beneath. I think it's also very difficult for the sector to learn. There's a reluctance across the sector to share perhaps data or indeed quality failures. If you compare this to perhaps the aviation or nuclear sectors, there is a completely different approach to risk and a completely different approach to sharing information about regulatory or quality failures. And this is due to the risks around the impact to the individuals or the people that they could pose a risk to. And my question is, why on earth, when we also have a risk associated to impacting a lot of people, one organisation could have a defective product, for example, which could impact numerous patients. But we don't have the same level of openness in terms of sharing information across our sector, and perhaps is something we need to think about in the future. I think also historically we've had a situation where regulators and the sector have really worked to try and perhaps eliminate or minimise risk. We've added complexity to do so. We've perhaps added a layer of oversight, or we've added layers of approval. At the time, we might think that's a great thing to do, but like I say, it just adds more and more complexity in order to try and smooth the way. It's actually done the opposite. So MHRA findings really not so dissimilar. Again, the same areas we see across the quality system, whether that's root cause analysis failures or failures in terms of deviation recording or the investigations associated to them. We perhaps spend too much time and too much thought on how quickly we can get to market, so speed to market, rather than the quality in mass production. So we're not really thinking about the root cause, we're just dealing with the symptoms all of the time. We often focus perhaps on fixing the process, rather than taking that deeper look I was talking about earlier, thinking about people and culture and the impact, the influence they have, how they intervene. We might have a really good procedure in place, and we might have the governance structure also in use that's operating that procedure. But is the reality really what we hope it should be? Is it actually delivering what it should? If you take a quality management review or a reporting process, you might have a good SOP and you might have a good governance structure. But are the right things being reported? Or is culture or people, their concerns getting in the way of the right things getting to the right people so that the right decisions can be made? It's interesting because we see very clearly a shift by the regulator. This was a quote by Laura Squire, the current Chief Quality and Access Officer in the UK MHRA. Compliance is a behaviour, very much depicting the fact that culture and people and their interventions are a part of our regulatory system, and something that we really need to pay attention to in order to ensure regulatory compliance in the future. So what's influenced this level of, this change in directions rather? Well, I mean, has it come from perhaps the fact that we really want to have robust and effective quality systems? Of course, it probably has. Historical deficiencies like data integrity, and we'll come on a bit more about that, but yes, I'm sure that's part of it. Our increased knowledge, of course, we continue to develop as a sector, and the global nature of our supply chain, of course, increases every day. And I think there is always going to be an overarching desire to have that high quality, safety and effective medicines out for the patients. So it's probably a bit of all of these. But let's pick up that example on data integrity. The impact of data integrity issues are broad, and of course there is a risk to patients where we have data integrity issues. That risk comes in many different forms, whether that's supply disruption, a substandard or defective product, or perhaps even loss of confidence in you as a manufacturer. It has reputational damage for obviously the organisation and the market. And as we say, there can be recalls or supply disruption. The compliance issues obviously will increase regulatory burden, and this, of course, will also increase the cost of the quality elements that you have to put in place. And I think it's probably also at this point worth considering the cost of quality generally. It's been reported that if you have a very immature organisation, then actually the cost of quality is somewhere in the region of 25 to 40% of revenue. Whereas a mature or leading or optimised organisation, the cost of quality can actually be as little as perhaps 3 to 7% of revenue, a marked difference and something really worth an organisation driving towards. Because of course the primary aim here is to have safe and effective products for patients, but equally there is a need to maintain a viable business. So NSF have been partnering with an organisation called Clarity Compliance Solutions to actually come up with and develop a data integrity maturity assessment model. This model is a great visual representation of the maturity of an organisation through a very simple process, and can be repeated every 6 months or every year to really see how the maturity of the organisation is moving over time. And it's a great example of something that can be provided to a regulator to show commitment, but also development. The process is fairly straightforward. Like I say, it's very much a design. It's delivered in terms of an assessment process. The results from that assessment are then analysed and reported, along with the opportunity to have an action planning session. But the recommendations really form the basis for that roadmap for the future maturity in DI. The outcomes, as I said earlier, very much demonstrate the improvement, and we do this very visually, but also in a narrative So you're able to see very quickly and clearly where you're making clear improvements over time, but also perhaps areas that are not going as well as perhaps you hoped they might. It's an excellent visual representation of the position of your organisation, both for your leadership team, but also for the regulator or other auditors. And here's a case study of one of our clients who've used the data integrity maturity assessment. This client was actually, is maybe familiar to some of you, obviously under an immature inspection. They ended up with the compliance monitoring team because torn records were found in their bin. And this was unfortunately found during an inspection. The inspector wasn't very happy about this. They went further into their data integrity policies and looked deeper and deeper, finding various problems, which resulted in them being moved to an increased inspection cycle. We developed a strategic plan with the organisation following the data integrity maturity assessment. This allowed them to have a roadmap of actions, start taking control of the situation and moving to greater levels of maturity. The client themselves indicated that they thought it saved them in the region of about 5 additional inspections because they were moved out of the compliance monitoring team. And they also felt it saved them a significant amount of money by not having the additional work to do from the inspections, but also in obviously rework for areas that had been identified to have data integrity issues. So it really was a great example of how this tool can both satisfy an inspection remediation problem, but also can actually ensure that it keeps the organisation on the right footing and with great feedback from the inspectors too. So data integrity, of course, is one area that forms part of that broader quality culture challenge. And we have to really think now about all of the different things that are coming through the pipeline around this sort of area. And we have, for example, Pharma 4. Pharma 4 is very much the ISP roadmap to a smart factory. It leverages potential of digitization, it embraces innovation, and it embeds best practice. Industry 5, however, which is also coming through, we see that we've got humans and machines working together to create a more streamlined, efficient approach to production of goods and services, and this includes medicines and pharmaceuticals. Outcome-based cooperative regulation. This is very much around collaborative approaches, really looking at all of the actors within the sphere of a regulatory arena, making sure they all take accountability for their part of the regulatory process. And this includes the organisation themselves, but also stakeholders, regulators, and the like. It builds trust, it ensures people do the right thing, and it really does very much rely on intrinsic motivations rather than imposing strict controls, so quite a different mindset. ISP is cultural excellence. Well, this builds on ICH's Q10 on pharmaceutical quality systems. It relates to advancing pharmaceutical quality. It's designed very much to enhance and assess the pharmaceutical quality system maturity, but it's more of a self-assess, self-improve model rather than the independent model that you see with quality management maturity. It aims to increase reliability of supply, of course, but what's really important is it requires ownership of quality, and you'll see this coming through more and more. Quality management maturity and sustained quality management and culture. Well, you know, these are tricky areas, and we'll come on and talk more about them. But we know that if compliance increases, then risk obviously decreases, as does cost. But supply reliability increases, regulatory burden decreases. So it's better for you, it's better for the regulator, but importantly, it's better for the patient. So how do we get to an enhanced state of maturity? And we know that there are different cultures, both geographically and locally in the company or whatever. So that plays a part. So how are you going to set yourself up for success? Well, let's think about that now and talk more about QMM. So let's look at QMM itself. QMM, or quality management maturity, as I say, is something that the US FDA are talking more and more about. But what are the advantages? I mean, why should we even look at QMM in the first place? Well, it's very much aligned to that regulatory position. It's very proactive when it comes to things like continuous improvement or innovation. It's important to note, though, it's not an audit, it's not an inspection, it's a different mindset. It's looking at robustness and effectiveness of your quality management system and how that interplays with the individuals within your organization. It's incredibly versatile. It can be used in all different environments. It can be used very quickly as a check to see how things are going in your organization. It can be used to respond to inspection findings, or indeed it can just be used as following the desire to increase your maturity. And it can be very much tailored to the organization and really giving you that roadmap that suits you and your organization ambitions. On the right-hand side of this slide, you'll see that there is a white paper there. We've put this out recently on LinkedIn, but if anyone wants to have another copy, please let me know and I will provide a link in the chat. But QMM, I think ultimately it really helps increase delivery and performance. And importantly, as I say, because we want you to have viable businesses, it reduces the cost of quality too. So QMM came from, like I say, the US FDA, but why did they come out with it? Well, the FDA in 2019 issued a drug shortages report. This suggested that 62% of shortages from 2013 to 2017 were due to manufacturing or product quality problems. QMM, as it's known now, is very much an FDA rating system. It's designed to incentivize greater levels of quality maturity, therefore compliance, and therefore reducing the level of shortages. But recently, they have also issued some further thinking. They've been doing a number of pilot studies, and now they're considering how they might implement this into a voluntary system at first, possibly partnering with other organisations to help them undertake those assessments. But the goals of the programme are fourfold: to foster a strong quality culture, to recognise the establishments that have advanced quality management practices, to identify areas where quality management practices can be enhanced and provide suggestions for growth and opportunities, to minimise risks to product availability, to assure reliable market supply. And I think if we think about all of those words that are used through their fourfold areas and goals, it really does demonstrate the thinking that we've seen throughout the trends, whether it's through the outcome-based cooperative regulation or around building trust and recognising the advanced quality, whether it's about improving the culture, for example, or indeed whether it's about making reliable supply. So all of these things have culminated together in the FDA's thinking, I believe, to really come forward with a great programme for greater levels of quality. They've also indicated that they're developing a prototype assessment protocol to cover 5 practice areas that you can see here. These 5 areas are obviously going to be key to the inquiry areas for which they will proceed. But the USA have also written, as I say, this long paper, and the paper for me has a number of takeaways and reflections. I think it's worth saying that throughout all of the different trends, and particularly for QMM, leadership is fundamental. There has to be a golden star for which is dedicated to quality. The leadership and the leadership team need to have unwavering dedication for quality culture, quality management system maturity. And they need to be aggressively pushing away any elements that perhaps contradict or contravene their desire to enhance their maturity in this area. There is a real need for a risk management plan to mitigate potential supply disruptions. And this is not just about dealing with symptoms, but really getting under the skin of the problem to understand the root cause. I think there's also a question being posed here by the FDA, which is very much one to industry, to say, what does being proactive or forward thinking really mean in this area? How can you as an organisation demonstrate that you are really forward thinking, have control, but you are determined to mature your organisation in the right way? I think there's also something about thinking about that feedback loop. How do you ensure that any information along your product life cycle is actually utilised to the greatest effect in order to provide that reliable supply, that safe and effective product to the patient? How does that information go back around the loop and reach the right points at the right time? I think innovation is also really key within their paper. They talk very much about innovation in technical excellence. And this leads me on to think a bit more about lighthouses. And I'll come on to mention lighthouses at the end of this part. There is also the key element of quality culture, and this is all to do with people. How do you have that enhanced employee experience? We always talk about customer experience or staff surveys, but we're talking about enhanced employee experience, which is a different perspective. If an employee is enjoying what they're doing and they feel empowered, then they're more likely to drive forward with the same ambitions as the organisation and help drive for that positive quality culture. And finally, along with, of course, the ambition to protect patients, there is, of course, the benefit of cost of quality being reduced by mature quality management system. So if we think about how QMM actually is utilised, we look at the traditional approach. The traditional was fairly transactional, looking at 3 or 4 different areas and assessing a quality system fairly bluntly as a blunt instrument. But what we've moved to now is a quality management maturity system based on the FDA's model. We have now NSF's QMM assessment tool. This very much looks at strategic, tactical, and operational areas of your business. It pulls themes and has areas of inquiry that delves deeply into the very fibres of your organisation to try and understand how you're operating, whether what's in place and what's in use is actually the reality of your organisation. And it pulls the threads together to really come out with an overarching view, a holistic view of your organisation, but fundamentally taking culture and the human intervention in your quality system into account. The process is fairly straightforward, but very much tailorable to your organisation, where we can obviously define and understand what QMM means to your organisation, tailor the assessment accordingly, undertake the assessment, and work with you to ensure that the roadmap of actions, and then beyond that, the continuous improvement to improve your maturity, really aligns with your business objectives and your overarching desire to reach particular levels of maturity. And if we look then at what the pathway is for that maturity evolution, I can give you a few examples. For low maturity organisations, we have very high levels of unplanned work, we have high levels of rework, we have high deviations, we have high levels of excursions, as you would probably expect. But we also have lots of out-of-date procedures, perhaps no or very little continuous improvement or innovation. The organisation is perhaps very reactive, and because of that, motivation is quite low. And so we see high levels of attrition rates and sometimes actually even low levels of fairness and equality. As you mature your organisation through that process, and we see higher maturity level organisations who have much lower levels of rework and much lower levels of unplanned work. But we do see high continuous improvements, high levels of innovation, really dynamic and strong leadership We see best-in-class processes and practices across the organisation, from every area to every room. We see highly engaged staff. We see increased performance because of this, and obviously what follows is obviously reduced compliance issues. The culture is very much one of trust, transparency. The leadership embrace inclusivity and innovation and learning. It's a very different feel in that organisation. And this is where the maturity comes into its own, because as an organisation goes through that maturity profile, we can actually demonstrate, and we can see that by doing the QMM assessment on a regular basis to show that progression and that target getting closer and closer for the organisation. So the output that you will receive from NSF would be a report, as I say, with a detailed narrative, but also a roadmap of actions. But additionally, an executive summary, which is suitable for regulatory perusal. And really, it gives you that basis to move forward. There's also an appendix that can be compiled with a number of additional elements that, if needed by the organisation. And as we said at the start, there's a number of benefits from doing this. It is very much where the regulators are going. We heard earlier, Laura Squire, compliance is a behaviour. We know this is on the cards for the US FDA, and we're waiting for it to see how that's going to be implemented. And we're seeing more and more industry partners wanting this particular service to be undertaken, to be proactive and get ahead of the game, and be there ready for the inspectors with the QMM report to show that there is this real control of the organisation. But aside from all of that, it really does support a really progressive organisation that wants to lead the way. It shows that there's a positive culture climate across the organisation. It demonstrates that resilience that the organisation could have if it continues on that maturity profile. And it reduces all of those non-compliances and minimises the risk of recalls, for example. So some really great benefits to move forward with this particular area. So there are a number of different ambitions that obviously we all have. And we obviously want a roadmap to get to that best in class. And the different ambitions could be anything from being perhaps a lighthouse. And I wanted to mention the lighthouse really because it's quite important. We have two companies in India, for example, that are now seen as lighthouses. And lighthouses are really manufacturers showing leadership in applying technologies to scale to drive step change financial, operational and sustainability improvements by transforming factories, value chains and business models. And I know there's a desire for other organisations in India to reach this step, and quality culture and quality management maturity and indeed things like data integrity all form part of that process to get to the right position. And we must all prepare for the future because, okay, lighthouses are one point, but growth is another. And of course, patient safety is the key point. Finally, just to say thank you so much for enjoying and joining us for the webinar this afternoon. I hope it's been an enjoyable process, and I'll take any questions in the chat now. Thank you.